By sunrise, one man would be lying in a hospital bed, one house would be marked for destruction, and one decision made in the dark of night would be the only thing keeping both of them alive. This is not a fairy tale. This is not some feel-good moment designed to make you smile and forget. This is about what happens when you give away the last thing you have to a stranger who doesn't even know your name. And it's about what happens when that stranger turns out to be the only person in the city with the power to stop the machine that's coming for everything you love. What you're about to hear will make you question every time you drove past someone in need. Every time you told yourself it wasn't your problem. Every time you convinced yourself that one small act couldn't possibly matter. Because on this night, in this storm, it mattered more than anyone could have imagined. Picture a two-lane road in the middle of nowhere. Rain coming down so hard you can barely see the hood of your own car. Lightning ripping through the sky every few seconds, turning the world into a strobe light of chaos and shadow. The kind of night when smart people stay home. The kind of night when the radio tells you to avoid rural routes, to stay off the back roads, to wait until morning. But Mark didn't have the luxury of waiting. He was 28 years old, exhausted from a double shift at a diner that paid him barely enough to cover gas, and his stomach had been growling for hours. In the passenger seat sat a white foam container with meatloaf and mashed potatoes. His only meal. His cook had handed it to him as an end-of-shift special, and Mark had almost eaten it right there in the parking lot. But he didn't. Someone else needed it more. He was heading to see his mother. She was sick, had been for months, and the house she lived in was falling apart around her. Not because she didn't care for it, but because there was no money. There's never enough money when you're working 2 jobs and still can't catch up. Mark knew every crack in that house, every loose floorboard, every window that didn't quite close all the way. He knew the smell of the kitchen where his mother used to make Sunday dinners, back when she could still stand at the stove without getting dizzy. He knew the sound of the screen door that had been broken since he was a kid. That house was everything. It was history and memory and the only solid ground he had left. And in a few hours, he would find out that someone was trying to take it away. But right now, in this moment, Mark didn't know any of that. All he knew was the rain, the road, and the gnawing hunger in his gut. He gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, leaning forward like that would somehow help him see through the wall of water crashing against the windshield. The wipers were useless. They slammed back and forth like panicked arms trying to push back the ocean. And then, for just a fraction of a second, lightning lit up the world. And Mark saw him, an old man, maybe 70, stumbling along the shoulder of the road, soaked to the bone, clutching a briefcase like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. And then, without warning, the old man stepped directly into Mark's lane. Mark slammed the brakes. The car lurched, tires screaming against wet asphalt, the whole vehicle sliding sideways before jerking to a stop. For a moment, everything was silent except for the rain hammering the roof like 1,000 tiny fists. Mark's heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat. He looked through the windshield, half expecting to see a body. But the old man was still standing. Barely. He was swaying on his feet, one hand pressed to his chest, the other still clutching that briefcase. And then he dropped to his knees. Mark didn't think. He just moved. He threw open his door and ran into the storm, rain instantly soaking through his cheap work shirt. He reached the old man and grabbed him by the shoulders. Sir, can you hear me? Mark shouted over the wind. The old man's lips moved, but no sound came out. His face was pale, almost gray, and his eyes had that unfocused look of someone who had pushed far past his limits. Mark looked around. No other headlights. No houses. Nothing but empty road and raging storm. There was no one else. Just him. Just this stranger. And a choice that would change both of their lives. Now, I want you to think about something. If you were in Mark's shoes, what would you do? You're exhausted. You're broke. You're hungry. You've got somewhere you need to be, someone counting on you. And suddenly, there's a stranger in the road. Someone you don't know. Someone whose problems aren't yours. Would you stop? Would you risk your own plans to help someone who might not even survive the night? Most people say they would. Most people believe they're the kind of person who does the right thing. But when the rain is pounding and your stomach is empty and your own mother is waiting for you in a house that might not be standing next week, what do you actually do? Mark made his choice. He hauled the old man to his feet, practically carrying him to the passenger side of his car. The man tried to protest, mumbling something about being fine, about needing to keep moving. But his legs buckled, and Mark had to catch him before he hit the ground. Mark shoved him into the seat, slammed the door, and ran back around to the driver's side. Water dripped everywhere. The old man was shivering so hard the whole seat seemed to shake. And then Mark looked at the foam container. His dinner, his only meal. He grabbed it and pushed it into the old man's trembling hands. "Eat," Mark said. It wasn't a suggestion. The old man blinked at him, confused. "That's yours," he managed to say, his voice thin and weak. "Not anymore," Mark replied. "Eat. Now." And the old man did. His fingers were stiff and clumsy, but he pried open the lid and took a bite of the meatloaf. Then another. Color started to return to his face, slowly, like dawn creeping over a frozen landscape. Mark put the car in drive and pulled back onto the road. He didn't know where he was taking this man. He just knew he couldn't leave him out there. The nearest motel was 15 minutes away. The hospital was 20. Mark pressed the gas and prayed the old sedan wouldn't give out on him. They drove in silence for a while. The only sounds the rain and the old man's labored breathing. "Name?" the old man finally asked, his voice a little stronger now. "Mark," he replied, not taking his eyes off the road. "You?" The old man hesitated, then said, "Harrison. Walter Harrison." Mark nodded like the name meant nothing. And to him, it didn't. He didn't read the newspapers. He didn't watch the evening news. He didn't know that Walter Harrison had spent 30 years as one of the most respected judges in the state. He didn't know that Harrison had put away criminals who thought they were untouchable, that he had written opinions that changed laws, that powerful people still whispered his name when they wanted something done right. To Mark, Harrison was just a soaked old man who needed help. Nothing more, nothing less. But Harrison saw something different. He saw a young man with tired eyes and worn-out shoes who had just given away his last meal to a stranger. He saw someone who stopped when everyone else would have driven by. And in that moment, something shifted inside the old judge. Something he thought had gone cold a long time ago. They reached the motel just as the storm seemed to reach its peak. Mark pulled under the awning and helped Harrison out of the car, practically carrying him to the front office. The clerk behind the counter looked up from a tiny television, and his eyes went wide. "Judge Harrison?" he said, clearly recognizing the face. Harrison didn't respond. He was barely staying upright. Mark slapped a card on the counter, his voice sharp. "One night. Whatever room's open." The clerk hesitated, looking at the card, then at Mark's soaked clothes, then at the legendary judge swaying on his feet. He ran the card. Approved. Mark felt a small twist in his gut. That charge would hurt. That money wasn't really there. But he did it anyway. He walked Harrison to the room, helped him to the door, and watched as the old man leaned against the frame, breathing heavily. "I owe you more than you understand," Harrison said, his voice hoarse but firm. "You can pay me back by not dying tonight," Mark replied. Harrison's mouth twitched. Almost a smile. "I won't forget this," he said. And there was something in his eyes, something steel-hard beneath the exhaustion. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you remember that." "I don't forget." Mark just nodded, too tired to read between the lines. He turned and walked back into the ring. The door closed behind him with a soft click. And somewhere, miles away, in a city office where the lights never fully went out, someone was signing a piece of paper. A piece of paper with Mark's mother's address on it. A piece of paper that would change everything. Before we continue with what happens next, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. Whether you're in New York or Texas, whether you're in a small town or a big city, we want to know. And if you're new here, go ahead and click that subscribe button. Turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Because what's coming next in this video is something you won't want to miss. The storm that hit that night was nothing compared to the storm that was about to hit Mark's life. And the old man he saved? He was about to become the only weapon Mark had against a system designed to crush people just like him. Mark got home around 2 in the morning. His apartment was small, cramped, the kind of place where you could hear your neighbor's television through the walls, and the hot water only worked half the time. He collapsed onto his bed without even changing out of his wet clothes. Sleep hit him like a hammer, deep and dreamless. But it didn't last. His phone started buzzing around 6, vibrating against the nightstand with an urgency that felt wrong. He grabbed it, squinting at the screen. Unknown number. Hospital exchange. His heart clenched before he even answered. "Hello." His voice was rough with sleep. Is this Mark Davis? The voice on the other end was clipped, professional, the kind of voice that delivered bad news for a living. Yeah, this is the overnight coordinator at County Medical. We have your mother, Evelyn Davis, here. She was brought in early this morning with stress-related complications. Mark sat up so fast the room tilted. Complications? Is she okay? What happened? She's stable. For now. But her condition is fragile. She keeps asking for you. And she keeps repeating something about her house. You need to come. Now. The line went dead. Mark didn't remember getting dressed. He didn't remember grabbing his keys, or running down the stairs, or getting into his car. One moment he was in bed, and the next he was speeding through streets still wet from last night's storm, his mind racing faster than the engine. His mother, in the hospital, saying something about the house. What did that mean? What had happened? He tried calling his lawyer, a guy named Levine who had been helping them with some paperwork. Last week, Levine had said not to worry. Yesterday, he had said they still had options. This morning, his phone went straight to voicemail. Mark burst through the hospital doors like a man being chased. He signed in with shaking hands, took the elevator to the intensive care unit, and followed the arrows until he found her room. She was there, in the bed, looking smaller than he remembered. Fragile. There were tubes and monitors, beeping machines tracking her heartbeat, an oxygen cannula under her nose. Her eyes fluttered when she saw him, but they couldn't quite focus. A nurse adjusted something on the floor and gave Mark a hard look. You must be her son. You can sit. But don't agitate her. Any shock is bad right now. Whatever is going on out there, keep it away from this room. Out there. Those words hit Mark like a punch. What was going on out there? Before he could ask, his phone buzzed again. He stepped into the hallway and answered without looking at the screen. The voice on the other end was cold, efficient, and utterly without sympathy. Mr. Davis. This is Daniel Cross with the Redevelopment Authority. I'm calling as a courtesy. Per last night's order, the structure at 414 Pine, your listed residence, is scheduled for emergency demolition this morning. Mark felt the floor drop out from under him. You can't do that. My mother's in the hospital. We have an appeal pending. The appeal was denied. Cross replied, his tone flat. The structure has been deemed unsafe and a public hazard. Crews are en route. You have approximately 40 minutes to remove any essential personal items, if site safety conditions permit. 40 minutes. The words echoed in Mark's head like a death sentence. 40 minutes? Are you insane? She doesn't even know this is happening. She can't handle this kind of news right now. It could kill her. Mr. Davis, these decisions are final. Delays cost the city money. I suggest you act quickly. The line went dead. Mark stood in that hallway, phone in hand, staring at nothing. His mother was in a hospital bed, too fragile to even hear the news. Her house, the house where she had raised him, where she had buried his father's memory, where she had spent every holiday and every Sunday and every quiet evening for the past 40 years, was about to be demolished. And he had 40 minutes to stop it. He looked back into the room. The monitors beeped steadily. Her chest rose and fell with effort. He couldn't tell her. Not now. Maybe not ever. But he couldn't just stand there. He leaned into the doorway, his voice barely above a whisper. Don't move, he said, more to himself than to her. Don't you move. And then he ran. The drive to Pine Street felt like an eternity. Mark's hands shook on the wheel, his mind cycling through every possible scenario. Maybe there had been a mistake. Maybe Levine had fixed something at the last minute. Maybe this was all just a misunderstanding. But when he turned onto his mother's street, all hope evaporated. The scene was chaos. City trucks blocked the road. Yellow tape surrounded the property. Reporters with cameras had gathered on the sidewalk. Neighbors stood in clusters, watching with expressions that ranged from shock to resignation. And at the end of the street, parked in front of his mother's house, was a bulldozer. Its metal claw hung above the roofline like an executioner's blade waiting to fall. A bright red X had been painted on the front door. Mark ducked under the tape before anyone could stop him. A security guard shouted something, but Mark ignored him. He walked straight toward the house, toward the machine that was about to erase everything. A foreman in a reflective vest stepped into his path. This area is restricted. You need to get back behind the barrier. That's my mother's house, Mark said, his voice shaking with fury. You don't touch it. A man in a suit approached. Daniel Cross, early 40s, perfectly groomed, with the kind of detached expression that came from years of signing papers that destroyed lives without ever seeing the consequences. "Mr. Davis, I assume," Cross said. "You just called me. You said 40 minutes. I got here in 10. Cross checked his watch, unmoved. "And crews have been mobilizing since 6. The order is clear. We're operating under emergency authority. The building is a liability." He held out a file like it was a weapon. Signed. Stamped. Legal. Mark didn't take the file. He looked past Cross to the bulldozer operator, hand on the controls, waiting for a signal. "My mother isn't a liability," Mark said, his voice cracking. "That house is all she has. At least let me get her things out." Cross cut him off. "Essentials only, if the foreman clears it as safe. Structural integrity is compromised. There's mold, wiring issues, a weak foundation. Frankly, you're lucky the city is handling this at no cost to you." Mark laughed. It was a dangerous sound. "Lucky," the foreman called out. "Clock's ticking. We're already behind." The bulldozer's engine revved higher. Mark took a step toward the house. The security guard grabbed his arm. "Sir, don't make me cuff you." Mark yanked free. "You can't do this. She just got out of the hospital." Cross's eyes narrowed. "Then this is for her own good, isn't it? Safer neighborhoods. New development. Progress." He turned and raised his hand toward the bulldozer operator. "Let's proceed." The operator nodded. The claw began to rise. The engine roared. And then, cutting through the noise like a judge's gavel, came a single word. "Hold it." Everyone turned. Down the block, a black sedan had pulled to a stop. The back door opened, and Walter Harrison stepped out. Today, the suit was pressed. The briefcase was dry. The old man from the storm looked very, very awake. He walked straight toward the yellow tape, shoulders squared, eyes locked on Cross. The same man Mark had pulled from the road just hours ago was now walking into his life again, carrying something the demolition could not ignore: authority. Harrison paused at the tape. The security guard moved to block him, then recognized his face and stepped aside without a word. Cross forced a polite smile. "Judge Harrison, this is unexpected." Mark's head snapped between them. "Judge?" Harrison didn't look at Mark. His gaze stayed fixed on Cross. "Show me the order." Cross hesitated. "With respect, sir, you're retired. This is a city matter. Show me the order." The street went silent. Even the bulldozer's engine seemed to quiet down. Cross finally handed over the file. Harrison opened it. His eyes moved fast, scanning pages with the precision of someone who had spent decades dissecting lies hidden in legal language. He turned a page, then another. His expression shifted from neutral to ice cold. "Who drafted this?" Harrison asked, his voice like a blade. Cross was careful. "The Redevelopment Authority legal team, with input from outside counsel. It's standard procedure." "No," Harrison said. "It's not." He tapped a paragraph with one finger. "This language right here is a perversion of emergency condemnation powers. You pushed an unsafe structure label without independent verification. You bypassed full notice requirements. And you fast-tracked demolition conveniently aligned with your developer's construction schedule." Cross's mask slipped for half a second. "You're reading too much into this." Harrison cut him off. "I didn't spend 30 years on the bench to be lied to by second-rate paper pushers." He closed the file sharply and turned to the bulldozer operator. "Cut the engine." The operator looked at the foreman. The foreman looked at Cross. Cross said nothing. After a long pause, the operator shut down the machine. The sudden silence was almost deafening. Harrison turned to Mark. "Mr. Davis, step over here." Mark joined him, still trying to process what was happening. "You're a judge?" Harrison's eyes didn't waver. "Was long enough to know when someone is trying to steal a house behind the law's back." He looked back at Cross. "You didn't expect anyone to look too closely at this, did you? Poor neighborhood. Sick homeowner. Overworked public defenders. A demolition scheduled before anyone could get their bearings." Harrison took out his phone and dialed a number. "Elaine, it's Walter. I'm standing in front of a house on Pine Street about to be illegally demolished under city authority." A sharp female voice came through the speaker. "Walter? Explain." Harrison's voice was crisp. "Emergency condemnation pushed through last night. No proper notice. No independent inspection. A clause piggybacked onto a redevelopment contract with very interesting investors. I'm sending you the documents now." He snapped photos of the file and sent them with a few quick taps. How long before demolition starts? The voice asked. Harrison looked at the bulldozer. 30 seconds if I step away. I'm requesting an emergency injunction. Now. There was a pause. Then the voice on the phone spoke again, decisive. Stay on the line. Don't let them move. Give me 5 minutes. Harrison ended the call and looked at Cross. You heard her. Nothing moves. Cross's jaw tightened. You're overstepping. This is an administrative matter. You have no standing here. Harrison stepped closer, his voice low enough that only Cross and Mark could hear. You almost died last night, Mark. Mark stiffened. Harrison continued, still addressing Cross. I was on a rural road in a storm that could have erased me without a trace. No motorcade. No clerk. Just an old fool who thought he could walk through a hurricane. This man, this waiter, stopped his car. Gave me his last hot meal. Paid for my room with a card that was probably already overdrawn. He turned back to Cross. And while he was doing that, you signed this. You tried to erase his mother's life before sunrise. Wrong night. Wrong sun. Wrong judge. Cross's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You have no idea who you're picking a fight with. Harrison didn't flinch. Neither do you. His phone chimed. He checked the screen, then answered. Elaine. Emergency injunction granted, the voice said. Effective immediately. Any attempt to proceed will be considered contempt of court. I want everyone involved in my courtroom at 9 tomorrow morning. I'm sending the order to your phone and the city fax now. Harrison turned the screen toward Cross. The document was there in black and white, the judge's digital signature at the bottom. Game over. For today, he raised his voice so everyone could hear. Per Judge Elaine Murray's order, any further demolition action at this site is suspended until further hearing. That is not a suggestion. That is law. The foreman lifted his hands. Shut it down. Pack it up. The crews began moving, turning off machines, lowering the claw, coiling straps. The yellow tape suddenly looked weaker, less threatening. Mark exhaled like someone had cut a rope from around his chest. He looked at Harrison, struggling to find words. How did you even know to come? Harrison considered him for a long moment. When I woke up this morning, I ran your card through my head like a case file. Piece by piece. Beat up car. Takeout box you didn't touch. Eyes that looked like they hadn't seen a full night's sleep in weeks. When the clerk said my name, you didn't flinch. You don't read the papers. You're not in my world. But you stopped anyway. He nodded toward the house. Men like Cross bet on one thing. That people like you will be too tired, too broke, too alone to push back. They push emergency orders through late at night when no one is watching. They count on silence. I've been silent for a long time. Your headlights woke me up. The courtroom hearing the next morning was unlike anything Mark had ever experienced. Judge Elaine Murray sat on the bench, sharp-eyed and impatient. Mark and his mother were at one table. She had been released from the hospital early that morning, fragile but determined to be there. She sat in a wheelchair, a blanket over her knees, watching everything with quiet intensity. Harrison stood beside them in a tailored suit, completely in his element. Across from them sat Cross, the housing commissioner, a representative from the developer, and a team of city lawyers who looked like they wished they had called in sick. Harrison presented the evidence methodically, dismantling the city's case piece by piece. He showed how the emergency condemnation had been pushed through without proper notice or independent verification. He presented emails that proved the timing was coordinated with the developer's construction schedule, not genuine safety concerns. This photo, Harrison said, pointing to a projection on the screen. When was it taken? Who ordered it? Why is the timestamp missing? He read from an internal email. If we can push Pine through tonight, we hit our Q3 benchmark. That doesn't sound like concern for public safety. That sounds like a developer's deadline. Judge Murray turned to Cross. Did you disclose your financial interest in Halcyon Development before signing off on this order? Cross shifted in his seat. My relationship with Halcyon is minimal. Indirect. Harrison pounced. Schedule K-1 forms. Stock options. Board meeting minutes. You might call that barely. The ethics committee might not. The courtroom murmured. Judge Murray banged her gavel once. This stops now. Quiet. She looked at Mark's mother, and something softened in her expression for just a moment. Then her voice hardened again. Mr. Cross, the burden was on you to prove emergency conditions. You failed. Spectacularly. This court finds the emergency condemnation order invalid and vacated. She shifted her focus. Mrs. Davis's house will not be demolished. Not today. Not under this scheme. And any attempt to retaliate against her or her son will be met with immediate sanctions. She looked directly at Cross. In addition, this court is forwarding the complete record to the State Attorney General and the Bar Association. We will find out how deep this goes. Her gavel slammed down. The sound echoed through the room like a period at the end of a sentence. Mark closed his eyes. His hand was gripping his mother's wheelchair, so hard his knuckles had gone white. Her hand reached out and touched his. No words, just contact. A few days later, the house on Pine Street stood exactly where it had always been. Workers had come to repair loose shingles, shore up a porch post, replace frayed wiring. A city inspector signed off on a certificate of occupancy and taped it over the spot where the red X had been. Reporters did stand-ups across the street, talking about alleged abuse of emergency powers and questions swirling around the redevelopment authority. But inside the house, it was quiet. Mark sat on the front porch, elbows on his knees, staring at the street. He heard footsteps on the gravel and looked up. Harrison was there, briefcase in hand, looking tired but satisfied. "You really came back," Mark said. "I said I don't forget." Harrison climbed the steps and sat beside him. They looked at the street in silence for a moment. "Let me tell you something," Harrison finally said, "and then we never have to talk about it again." Mark waited. "Years ago, I lost someone in an accident. Single car. Bad weather. The report said someone might have seen the wreck in time to help. No one stopped." He stared straight ahead. "I've sentenced thieves, killers, men who did unspeakable things. But the people I couldn't get out of my head were the ones who drove past and did nothing. When I saw your headlights that night, I thought it was happening again. I was wrong." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a business card. "Simple. Just a name and a phone number. You're going to keep running into people like Cross. Maybe not with bulldozers, but with forms, paychecks, fine print. You ever decide you want to learn how to fight on this side of the table, call me." Mark looked at the card. "You recruiting?" Harrison almost smiled. "Let's call it returning a favor. Storms don't stop. They just change shape." He stood and walked down the steps. "Keep your eyes open, Mark. This town is going to stay interesting for a while. So here's what I want you to think about. What do you call this story? Is it a thriller about corruption almost getting away with it? Is it a miracle hitchhiking in a storm? Or is it just the consequence of one small decision? To stop, to open the door, to give away the last thing you thought you needed to survive the night? If you were in that car, exhausted, broke, hungry, and you saw an old man stumbling in the rain, would you have pulled over? Would you have handed him your dinner? Paid for his room with money you didn't have? Or would you have told yourself that someone else would help and driven past? And if you were in Harrison's shoes, comfortable in retirement, out of the game, would you have stepped back into a fight with City Hall for someone who didn't even know your name? Whose choice shook you more? Mark's in the rain, or Harrison's in front of that bulldozer? Drop your answer in the comments. Tell me what you would have done. And tell me this, do you believe in coincidence? Or do you think there's something else at work when two strangers meet in a storm and end up saving each other's lives? If this story kept you on edge, share it with someone who thinks their choices don't matter. Someone who believes that stopping to help one person is a waste of time. And if you want more stories like this, stories about quiet people standing up against loud systems, about storms and secrets and split-second decisions that change everything, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because if you think what happened on Pine Street was intense, wait until you hear about the night a nurse answered the wrong phone call and uncovered a secret her hospital would do anything to bury. Storms are coming. The question is, who will you be when they hit?